What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors goes head-to-head with a beloved morning show host in front of millions of viewers? What starts as a routine interview about a new film quickly spirals into something nobody saw coming. Denzel Washington, known for his composed demeanor and thoughtful responses, finds himself in a verbal battle that will leave the studio audience stunned and producers scrambling. This is the story of how a simple question about method acting turned into one of the most explosive moments in morning television history. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think really happened here. Now let's get into it. The Good Morning America studio was buzzing with its usual morning energy. Michael Strahan sat across from Denzel Washington, who had come on the show to promote his latest directorial effort, a gritty drama about urban life in the 1980s. The interview had been going smoothly for the first few minutes, with Denzel discussing his passion for storytelling and the challenges of wearing multiple hats as both director and star. "So, Denzel," Michael said, leaning forward with his characteristic smile, "I have to ask about your approach to this particular role. Your character goes through some pretty intense emotional moments. How do you prepare for something like that?" Denzel shifted in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Well, Michael, preparation is everything. I don't just show up and wing it. I live with these characters for months before filming even begins. I research. I observe. I become them in a way that most people wouldn't understand." "That's fascinating," Michael replied. "But some critics have said that method acting, especially when it comes to portraying characters from certain backgrounds, can be problematic. Do you ever worry about crossing lines or appropriating experiences that aren't necessarily your own?" The question seemed to catch Denzel off guard. His jaw tightened slightly, and there was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that question, Michael?" "I was asking about the criticism some method actors face when they take on roles that might be outside their lived experience. Some people say it can be a form of appropriation." Denzel's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting that I, as a black man who grew up in Mount Vernon, New York, can't authentically portray the experiences of other black men from similar backgrounds?" Michael quickly raised his hands in a placating gesture. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I think there might be some confusion here. I was speaking more generally about method acting as a technique, not specifically about your background or your right to tell these stories." "But that's exactly what you implied, Michael. You sat there and questioned whether I have the right to research and embody characters that share my racial and cultural heritage." "That's what I heard." The studio audience had gone quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to sense the tension building between the two men. Michael's smile had faded, replaced by a look of genuine concern. "Denzel, I think we're having a misunderstanding here. I have nothing but respect for your work and your right to tell any story you want to tell. My question was more about the broader conversation happening in Hollywood about method acting in general." "The broader conversation," Denzel repeated, his voice taking on an edge. "You mean the conversation where black actors are scrutinized and questioned about their authenticity, while white actors get praised for their dedication when they do the exact same thing?" Michael looked uncomfortable now, glancing briefly at the producers off camera. "I don't think that's a fair characterization of what I said. Isn't it, though? When Daniel D. Lewis spent months learning to be left-handed for my left foot, he was called brilliant. When Robert De Niro gained weight for Raging Bull, he was called committed. But when I mention that I research and live with my characters, suddenly we're talking about appropriation and crossing lines." "Denzel, I think you're reading something into my question that wasn't there." "Am I, or am I reading exactly what was there? You know, Michael, I've been doing this for over 4 decades. I've won 2 Academy Awards. I've been nominated for 8 others. I've directed films, produced films, worked on Broadway, and you're sitting there questioning whether I know how to do my job responsibly." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Michael tried to regain control of the situation, his media training kicking in. "I think we should take a step back here. My intention was never to question your abilities or your process. You're one of the most respected actors of your generation. But you did question it, Michael. And the thing is, I don't think you even realize you did it. That's what makes this whole thing so frustrating. It's unconscious. It's automatic. A black man talks about his craft with passion and dedication, and immediately the response is concern about whether he's doing it the right way. That's not fair. And that's not what happened here. Then explain to me what did happen, Michael. Explain to me how asking about appropriation and crossing lines was just a general question about method acting. Michael paused, clearly trying to choose his words carefully. I was referring to recent discussions in the industry about actors taking on roles that might be outside their cultural experience. It wasn't specific to you or your background. But you asked it of me in this context about this role. You didn't ask it as an abstract question. You made it personal by directing it at me and my work. The conversation had completely derailed from its original purpose. What was supposed to be a friendly promotional interview had become something else entirely. The producers were surely having a meltdown in the control room, but the cameras kept rolling. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair, realizing he was in deeper waters than he had anticipated. Denzel, I understand you're upset, but I think you're misinterpreting my intentions here. Misinterpreting? Denzel's voice rose slightly. Michael, I've been in this business long enough to recognize coded language when I hear it. When you ask a black actor about appropriation while discussing his own community stories, that's not a neutral question. That's loaded. I wasn't trying to use coded language. I was asking what I thought was a legitimate industry question. And that's the problem right there. You thought it was legitimate to question me in a way you probably wouldn't question others. Tell me something, Michael. When you had Matt Damon on this show talking about playing an astronaut in The Martian, did you ask him about appropriating the experiences of real astronauts? When you interviewed Christian Bale about playing Dick Cheney, did you worry about him crossing lines? Michael opened his mouth to respond, but Denzel continued. Of course you didn't, because when white actors transform themselves for roles, it's called acting. But when I talk about researching and embodying characters from my own community, suddenly there are concerns about authenticity and appropriation. Denzel, I think you're making this about race when it doesn't have to be about race. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Denzel stared at Michael for a long moment, his expression shifting from frustration to something approaching disbelief. It doesn't have to be about race, Denzel repeated slowly. Michael, everything in this industry is about race. Everything in this country is about race. The fact that you can sit there and say, it doesn't have to be about race proves exactly what I'm talking about. I'm just saying we don't need to make every conversation about racial dynamics. We don't need to make it about racial dynamics. Brother, the dynamics are already there. They've always been there. The question is whether we acknowledge them or pretend they don't exist. And right now, you're choosing to pretend. Michael looked increasingly flustered. I'm not pretending anything. I'm trying to have a professional interview here. A professional interview where you question my methods based on assumptions you didn't even realize you were making. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You did it automatically without thinking. And now when I point it out, your response is to tell me I'm making it about race. I didn't question your methods based on any assumptions. Yes, you did. You heard me talk about living with characters and immediately jumped to concerns about appropriation. You made the assumption that a black man researching and portraying other black experiences was somehow problematic. That assumption came from somewhere, Michael. The studio audience was completely silent now. This had gone far beyond an uncomfortable moment. This was a full-blown confrontation playing out in real time on national television. Michael tried a different approach. Denzel, I have tremendous respect for you and your work. I think there's been a genuine misunderstanding here, and maybe we should move on to talking about the film itself. Oh no, we're not moving on. We're going to finish this conversation because this is exactly the kind of thing that needs to be talked about. You don't get to ask loaded questions and then try to move on when you get called out. I don't think my question was loaded. Of course you don't. And that's the whole point. You asked it naturally, casually, because questioning black excellence is so normalized that you didn't even recognize you were doing it. That's not true, isn't it? Let me ask you something, Michael. How many white actors have you asked about appropriation when they take on roles? How many times have you questioned whether they're crossing lines or overstepping boundaries? Michael paused, clearly thinking. I can't recall specific instances. Exactly, because it doesn't occur to you to question them, but it occurred to you to question me. And when I point that out, instead of acknowledging the disparity, your response is to tell me I'm making it about race. I'm trying to understand your perspective here. No, you're trying to defend yourself, and that's human. I get it. Nobody wants to be told they said something problematic. But the mature response would be to actually listen and consider whether there might be some truth to what I'm saying. Michael took a deep breath. Okay, I'm listening, but I still don't agree that my question was inappropriate or racially motivated. And that's your right, Michael. But let me tell you what I heard. I heard a question that presumed I might not be qualified to authentically represent my own community. I heard skepticism about my ability to research and portray characters responsibly. And I heard those doubts being expressed about a body of work that spans decades. That wasn't my intention. Intent doesn't erase impact, Michael. Your intention might have been innocent, but the impact was to question my credibility in a way that felt targeted and unfair. I can accept that you felt that way, but I disagree with your interpretation. And there it is, Denzel said, leaning back in his chair. I can accept that you felt that way, not I can understand why you felt that way. Or maybe I need to examine my question more carefully. Just I accept that you felt that way. As if my response is purely emotional and not based on a legitimate reading of what happened. I didn't mean it that way. But that's how you said it. You're dismissing my interpretation of your words as just feelings rather than engaging with the possibility that your question revealed some unconscious biases. The tension between them was electric. Michael was clearly struggling to navigate the conversation, while Denzel seemed determined to push the discussion to its logical conclusion. Michael rubbed his forehead, clearly feeling the weight of the moment. Denzel, I'm trying to have a constructive conversation here, but I feel like you're not giving me any room to explain myself. I've given you plenty of room to explain yourself, Michael. The problem is that your explanations keep missing the point. You keep trying to justify the question instead of examining why you asked it in the first place. Because I think it was a legitimate question about your process as an actor and director. A legitimate question that you've never asked white actors in similar situations. A legitimate question that assumes I might not be capable of handling my own community stories responsibly. Do you see the contradiction there? Michael's frustration was becoming more visible. I can't win here, can I? No matter what I say, you're going to find a way to make it about racial bias. You can't win. Denzel's eyebrows shot up. Michael, this isn't about you winning or losing. This is about you understanding that your question had implications you didn't consider. But instead of acknowledging that possibility, you're making yourself the victim. I'm not making myself the victim. You just said you can't win. That's victim language. You're more concerned about being perceived as biased than you are about understanding why your question was problematic in the first place. That's not true. Then prove it. Instead of defending your question, ask yourself why you felt the need to question my methods when you don't question others. Ask yourself what assumptions led you to that moment. Michael was quiet for several seconds, and for a moment it seemed like he might actually engage with what Denzel was saying. But then he shook his head. I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree on this one, Denzel. Agree to disagree, Denzel repeated, his voice filled with disappointment. That's always the way these conversations end, isn't it? When white people are challenged on issues of race, the solution is always to agree to disagree, never to actually examine the behavior or consider the criticism. I don't think that's fair. Fair, Michael. What's not fair is being questioned about my ability to authentically represent my own community. What's not fair is having to defend decades of work because you made assumptions about my process. What's not fair is being told I'm making it about race when race was already part of the equation. The producers off camera were making frantic gestures, clearly wanting to cut to commercial, but Michael seemed determined to push forward. Denzel, I think you're being overly sensitive about this. The words hit the studio like lightning. Even the camera operators seemed to flinch. Denzel sat perfectly still for a moment, his expression unreadable. Overly sensitive, he said quietly. There it is, the classic dismissal. When Black people respond to microaggressions or unconscious bias, we're being overly sensitive. When we point out disparities in how we're treated, we're making it about race. When we refuse to just smile and move on, we're being difficult. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it, Michael? Because from where I'm sitting, you just told a Black man that his legitimate concerns about being treated differently are just him being too sensitive. Do you understand how that sounds? Michael looked genuinely distressed now. I'm trying to salvage this interview, Denzel. This has gotten completely out of hand. It got out of hand the moment you asked me a question you wouldn't ask white actors, and then refused to acknowledge the double standard. Everything that happened after that was just the natural consequence of not taking responsibility for your words. I don't agree that there was a double standard. Of course you don't. Because acknowledging the double standard would mean acknowledging that you treated me differently, and that's uncomfortable. It's easier to tell me I'm being overly sensitive than to examine your own behavior. The studio was dead silent. Michael looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would rescue him from the situation. I think, Michael said carefully, that we should probably wrap this up. Now you want to wrap it up, Denzel said, after you've questioned my methods, dismissed my concerns, told me I'm making it about race when it doesn't have to be, and called me overly sensitive. Now you want to end the conversation. I think it would be best for everyone. Best for everyone, or best for you. Because I'm perfectly comfortable continuing this discussion. I've been having conversations like this my entire career. The question is whether you're willing to have them honestly. Michael made one final attempt to regain control. Denzel, I want to thank you for coming on the show today to talk about your new film. Don't, Denzel said firmly. Don't try to pivot to some fake pleasantries now. Don't pretend this was a normal interview that just ran a little long. What happened here today was important, and trying to smooth it over with artificial courtesy diminishes it. I'm just trying to be professional. Being professional would have been thinking before you asked that question. Being professional would have been listening when I explained why it was problematic. Being professional would have been acknowledging that you might have made a mistake instead of doubling down and calling me overly sensitive. Denzel stood up from his chair, and for a moment it looked like he might walk off the set entirely. Instead, he looked directly into the camera. To anyone watching this who thinks I was too harsh or too confrontational, I want you to understand something. This is what it looks like when Black people refuse to just smile and nod when we're treated differently. This is what it looks like when we demand the same respect and consideration that others receive automatically. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe ask yourself why. He turned back to Michael one final time. This conversation didn't have to go this way, Michael. But it went this way because you chose to defend rather than listen, to dismiss rather than consider. That's on you. With that, Denzel Washington walked off the Good Morning America set, leaving Michael Strahan sitting alone at the interview table, the studio audience in stunned silence, and millions of viewers trying to process what they had just witnessed. What do you think about this explosive confrontation? Was Denzel Washington justified in his reaction, or did he take things too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.